Everybody, happy Saturday. We're going to talk about the hurricane season so far. It's been a quiet one in the Atlantic, no storms so far. That looks to continue for the near future. In the East Pacific, it's been a little bit busier than we expected. Remember, we talked about how there was sort of this cooler water here with the negative PDO. And so, we kind of expected a quieter season, but the atmosphere has favored several East Pacific storms forming already. They've been kind of mostly short lived and weaker as they hit this strip of cooler water here. We did have a stronger storm, Major Hurricane Eric, that came up and was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, major hurricane to impact Mexico. And a very significant impact there is a Category 3. So it's been a busy and impactful season so far in the East Pacific. We'll see if that continues over the next month or two. So if we start to look at and think about why we've gotten this pattern so far, we've had this unusually strong, these are anomalies, departures from normal, unusually strong Bermuda high over the Western Atlantic and Caribbean and Gulf. And so you remember we have this clockwise flow around the high, so we've had stronger trade winds than usual. High pressure tends to be associated with sinking air. So this high pressure, it's had a lot of impacts. For one, we've had below normal rainfall over almost all of southeast Florida, because what happens is you get the strong high, you get these stronger trade winds out of the east, and so then you get your west coast sea breeze that then collides with that, and you get thunderstorms over here along the west coast, but you're not really getting any convergence or rainfall here along the east coast. And so it's been very dry, unusually dry. One of the driest Junes and kind of most unusual patterns I've seen in the 7-8 years I've lived here now. So it's been very dry here, and it looks like that's going to continue at least for a little bit longer. And what that means in terms of the tropics is you can kind of see that here with this ridge axis here, and then you have your strong trade winds to the south and your circulation, your high pressure to the north. So what that means is you had stronger than usual trade winds across the entire Caribbean and into the Gulf, pushing all the moisture and tropical waves and stuff into the East Pacific. And you've had, with some westerly anomalies here, basically, you've had favorable vorticity or spin here just to the south of Mexico. And for a little while, it was looking like we might get some of this to try to come up into the Gulf here, but the high pressure to the north has just been too strong and kind of kept everything suppressed further south. And so that's why everything's just been dominating in the East Pacific. And also when the East Pacific is active, you tend to, all that outflow aloft tends to increase the vertical wind shear over the Caribbean and Gulf. And sure enough, we've seen that. Shear over the Caribbean is running pretty solidly above normal right now. In a large part due to everything that's been happening in the East Pacific. And also with that high pressure and that sinking air, that leads to a very stable atmosphere. So that's tends to keep things very cloud free, makes life hard for thunderstorms. So not hard to see why we haven't had much in the way of tropical development in the Atlantic. And part of that's due to the MJO, that large scale pattern of rising and sinking air we talked about. It's been in phases that have favored the Pacific and kind of amplified over there. And so that favors rising motion in the Pacific and sinking over the Atlantic. And you can kind of see that in our 30-day anomalous velocity potential, basically. Think of your greens as large-scale rising air, your browns as large-scale sinking air. So kind of our La Nina signal here over the West Pacific. But then we've had this sort of MJO event that's led to rising over the East Pacific, helping to aid all the storms there. And what goes up must come down, so where air is coming down is here over the Atlantic and Africa. So when you have sinking there, that tends to be very suppressive and hurt any chances for Atlantic storm development. So it's not really a surprise that things have been quiet so far. So is that going to continue? That's the question. Certainly it's going to continue for the foreseeable future. If you look at the Atlantic, almost cloud-free throughout much of our main development region here. We have some convection here in the East Pacific, so big surprise. It looks like we're probably going to get at least one more Pacific storm out of this. Hopefully this one will stay south of Mexico. We'll see, but kind of have this train of storms forming there. So one of the busier starts in the East Pacific, kind of unexpected despite the SST pattern. And that looks to continue at least for a little bit. As we get further into later into June and July, you will have this sort of pulse of convection, Kelvin wave or MJO moving into maybe a little more favorable region. For the Atlantic, when you have rising over Africa like this, sometimes you can get storms, but it might be a little early given, as I'll show in a minute, the SST out there is still kind of running a little below normal. And so then as this, traverses the Pacific into mid-July, we'll probably get another chance of Pacific development. So my guess is it might be sort of the last 10 days of July before we see a real shot at something developing out in the deep tropics. But of course, you can always have something sneak up on you or form north of the deep tropics, off a front or something like that. So you never know. We'll keep an eye on things. And if we look at the SST pattern, how it's evolved, we still kind of have this mixed look in the Pacific. Some cool anomalies here. It was warmer to the west, so basically still neutral. The Equatorial Atlantic's mixed. We have sort of this cooler here, which looks like an Atlantic Nina, but then some warmer water trying to creep up here. So again, we'll see where that goes. The biggest thing is that if you look, the Atlantic main development region is running much cooler than it was last year. Basically near or below average in a lot of places, at least when you remove sort of the global signal. And instead, we have this warm signature, warm horseshoe north of the main development region. And that's tends to be associated with some issues with stability. And again, enhances that sinking air. So I went and looked and compared with past years because we kind of have this mixed look where you have, when you remove the global mean to sort of account for long-term climate trends, you see the Atlantic main development region is running below normal, but then this Canary Current region to the north is a lot warmer than normal. And it gives you very different answers if you look at those two things. The main development region is one of the coldest on record since the active era started in 1995. Really only warmer than very cold years of 2018 and 2015. But on the other hand, the Canary Current up here is close to some of our busier years like 2020. So if we kind of look at what that looks like, you can see this is 2020. You had sort of this warm horseshoe, but notice that you had a very warm main development region too, whereas this year you have all the warmth to the north. So 2020 is really not a good match. I don't think we're going to be nearly as busy as that. Then you go and look at a year like 2003, maybe a little bit better match. This is something where we had the warmer Canary Current here up to the north, and then at that point we had kind of a cooler to average main development region. So a little bit better match to what we have now. And if you look at, go 2 months into the future, you can see what ended up happening in 2020, in 2003, was that this warm water basically kind of, the more anomalous warmth ended up making it into the main development region. So 2003 had major hurricanes Isabel and Fabian. And as this SST pattern evolved to be something more favorable. So we'll have to see if something like that happens. If you look at the ECMWF, weeklies basically going out 6 weeks. This is the first week. You can see that they show that the pattern with the warmth to the north and then the cooler anomalies here. And they have sort of the trade winds out here, the central Atlantic, weakening enough to where if you look by week 6, so by basically the end of July, early August, it does show something in the realm of what happened in 2003 with some of the warmer water coming down here over the deep tropical Atlantic. But still maybe, kind of average overall, and with more of the warmth is up here to the north. So I still think we're going to have some stability issues, and I still think we're kind of looking at more of an average to maybe slightly above average year. And we'll have to see, how things evolve in the Pacific, because as long as the Pacific is active, it's going to make things very hard for the Atlantic. And if you look at how the shear is forecast to evolve, this is the CFS. It shows a pretty hostile pattern basically in July with a lot of shear on the west. As we get into August, things start to look a little more favorable, but still some issues. September is looking pretty favorable here. So, maybe this will be a year that kind of starts very quiet and then gets busy as we evolve to our more traditional peak. We'll see. In the Atlantic, the activity early in the season doesn't really have any relationship with activity later. You can have a very quiet start and still get a busy year. But like I said, with these SST pattern we have being kind of mixed, I think it remains to be seen just exactly what we get this year. So just stay safe, and we'll see how things evolve. Have a great day, everyone.